Hello again, friends, and you are our friends, and welcome to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, right here, wherever it is that you've pulled up to, whatever time it is that we open here this week, and whatever week it is that you're listening. I am your host, the great Brian Last.
Just give them all the options.
And I'm very happy to present to you from the dollar menu, the man who will be answering your questions, Mr. Jim Cornette.
What are you talking about from the dollar menu? Let me tell you something, pal. I'm not just a little small, thin patty of dried up, shriveled ground beef stuck in between a little bitty bun on that dollar menu. I'm that big, thick, meaty, juicy, throbbing triple in between those giant, massive buns over on the left side of that menu where the rich people eat, where the people that are well-heeled come into Wendy's and just throw caution to the winds and get the large, supersized stuff. That's what I am, pal.
Supersized? It hasn't been supersized in years.
Well, it ought to be.
Well,
that's the problem. You can't go in a place anymore and just say, God damn it, bring my food out in a trough. Just bring me, order food by the pound. That's why I like barbecue places. Because you can just go in and you can order food by the pound. Give me the pound of brisket. I want to, or like the TV dinners. You go in the frozen food section, the Hungry Man dinner, over 1.5 pounds of food. That's the way I want to eat, where you weigh my food instead of serve it or cook it. You just weigh it and bring it out to me in a fucking trough. That's the way a man eats.
And how do you feel after that?
Yeah, I bet you eat kale, don't you?
I juice kale. I don't really eat kale as much.
Trail mix.
Not really. Not a trail mix fan.
Fucking granola.
Granola's awesome.
Well, I knew one of those would trip your trigger somewhere. That's like James Gregory, the noted Southern philosopher and stand-up comic, said one time, all these kids these days eating granola and kale and healthy and all that stuff. What did people back in the old days eat? What did John Wayne's mama eat? Granola. Grease and gravy. And out popped John Wayne.
Grease and gravy.
Grease, Gravy, and John Wayne's Mama actually was the title of his album.
Oh, well,
I got to see him perform it live one night, but that nevertheless. Oh, should we give them the big news here on the program? We're cross-pollinating our programs here because the Drive-Thru, of course, comes out on Mondays. The Jim Cornette Experience comes out on Thursdays, and generally I slip out a time or two in between each of those. But we're cross-pollinating, we're cross-promoting. Last week got such incredible feedback all over the Twitters and the things and such of that nature people carry around in their pockets that this week on the Experience, we're giving people advance notice now. Because last week it was kind of an accident that I reviewed Raw. It was an accident. I was just trying to watch the one match, and I stumbled onto the on-demand showing with the fast-forward feature disabled. So I was held captive. Alakba. I was held captive and forced to sit and watch and give my opinions on some of the good and much of the bad. But this week we're going to do it on. I'm going to give them another chance. Raw gets a second chance this week on the Jim Cornette Experience because maybe under duress of viewing, because I was on a deadline. We had to record. We had to do the broadcasting, the cult casting for the millions. And maybe I was just impatient. So we're gonna start it from scratch. I'm gonna go all the way through this week, and I'm gonna stick with it to the bitter end.
Isn't there a pay-per-view? Why don't you watch the pay-per-view too?
Because I'd have to pay for that.
Hey, you know what you got to do though? If you're gonna do 2 weeks of Raw, to make up for it, you need to do at least 2 weeks of NXT. Something that you may possibly and probably like. Okay,
what channel is NXT currently on?
It's on the WWE Network.
Therein lies the fault in that logic, because I can get USA Network on my 82-inch screen in my TV room in my recliner with my surround sound speakers and my remote control that I know how to work. But to sit here and actually watch my computer for that long.
Do you have a DVD player?
Well, of course, everybody has a DVD player.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think we know any listeners out there who'd find a way to burn a couple of DVDs and get them to you, so you probably won't be able to use that.
Well, I guess you're right about that.
Yeah.
So that may take a little more time. But anyway, so that's what we're going to do this week on The Experience. You know what we're going to do in Chicago, don't you?
Is this food talk again?
Well, God, is today a day with a Y in it?
Well, yes.
Of course so. It's food, because I'm getting hungry already now. It's have a beef with Jim Cornette in Chicago at C2E2 as part of the festivities. C2E2 is March 22nd through 24th at McCormick Place in Chicago. Beautiful facility. I hear they're expecting nigh on to 100,000 people for C2E2 this year.
Wow. Really?
That's what I'm hearing. It's not like that's out of line over the course of the weekend. That's what takes place. It's a big deal. They're farting through silk down there in Chicago. Anyway, but on Saturday night, March 23rd, you'll get a chance to hang out and have a beef with me for 3 hours or more, depending on how many folks we get and how many stories I tell and how good the beef sandwiches are, and they're going to be good too. But you get the stand-up meltdown. You get Chicago wrestling stories. You get an interactive Q&A. You get a free 8x10 signed, autographed even, a photo op, and a Chicago Italian beef sandwich, courtesy of your leader of the cult of Cornette himself. When we have the pilgrimage, once again, the cult every couple of times a year, the cult engages in a pilgrimage. This is Chicago. Later on this year, it's going to be out in Charlotte. We're going to have many pilgrimages throughout. So anyway, join us, tinyurl.com/corny in Chicago. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way and go to c2e2.com. But you do not need to have a C2E2 ticket, although we certainly encourage it. It is $65 all in for everything. The meal, the memories, the machinations, the my alliterative tones have failed me. But anyway, all the shit you get. And we will have burger towels on site available for purchase so you can wipe all the greasy goodness off your face after you have a beef with me and you're just fucking covered in juices. Juicy, tangy goodness. Anyway, that's in Chicago. We're going to have fun there.
Sure sounds like it.
Well, it's not every time that you could go into a large group of people in a major metropolitan city and come out not only entertained but covered in grease.
Well, fortunately, there'll be enough towels there for people to wipe off the grease.
Well, that's what we're planning. That's swear to fucking Christ. When Bobby Fulton, who is one of the classic all-time professional wrestling live event small town promoters, he knows every trick in the book, right? And I've sat and watched and marveled at him over the years as he's come up with these promotions. He drew 1,500 people for me in Saltville, Virginia one time when he promoted a show at the high school football field for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. He can put a crowd anywhere for anything. But one of his old standbys, especially if the house was not what it should be, was to make sure to oversalt the popcorn. And you say, why?
I know why, so I was trying to.
Okay, well, to sell more drinks, ladies and gentlemen. Think about this. You're in this hot National Guard armory, and you want something to eat, and you get this popcorn, and it's more or less like chewing rock salt. You've got to, and they would go through cases of soft drinks after that all night. Those people would be. Anyway, but it adds to the bottom line. But you know what? If you feel, Brian, when you go to an event that you've paid your good hard-earned money for, and you feel you've been defrauded, what should you do?
You should call Stephen P. New.
That's right, because Stephen P. New is the king of people being defrauded. And I mean that in a good way, because he helps you, not the defrauders. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen P. New, I don't say this just because he is a fine sponsor of the Cornette's Drive-Thru. He's been affiliated with the program for quite some time, but also he's one of us. As we know, he's a wrestling fan. He's going to be there in Madison, West Virginia for All-Star Wrestling. The Midnight Express and I being inducted in the Hall of Fame on April 13th. He's going to be there and available to take your cases live and in person. He could probably, if you've got a serious legal issue and you get there before the meet and greet starts, he can probably have you a couple $1 million by the time the main event gets in the ring. That's how good and how quick Stephen P. New is. But at any rate, If you feel you've been defrauded, wronged, poisoned, that's always a good one, or another way harmed by a big corporation, Stephen P. New is not a man who backs down from BP or Exxon, the big pharma companies, Amazon, Universal Studios, Marriott, General Motors. I could go on. And also, he champions the kids in West Virginia, his home state, that have been bored addicted to opioids, and he's on the front lines of the battle against the opioid crisis to make sure that these families are made whole because they were misrepresented and through no fault of their own otherwise harmed. I don't know how I can say it otherwise than Stephen P. New is a fine American.
I would have to agree.
Now, hopefully we won't find out that he's an illegal immigrant.
Well, I don't think we have any risk of that.
Well, now that I've said that, see, every time that somebody gets over these days, something bad comes out. And, the governor of Virginia or, any big politician. Now, hopefully we will not find out that Stephen P. New actually is an illegal immigrant because he's a champion of the working class people. And God knows he's a white man in the United States of America that's trying to make it easier for the little guy and the working class and the immigrants and the folks that need assistance. So he must not be from here. That's completely out of character. Anyway, the newlawoffice.com is where you need to go. 888-692-8084, newlawoffice.com. If you need to sue, call Stephen P. New, because New is for you, and you can get even with my boy Stephen. With my boy Stephen, baby.
That's right.
All right, what are we supposed to do on this program?
Well, we're supposed to be answering questions from the listeners, which they send in.
Well, we have done a piss-poor job of that so far.
Well, they send them in a number of ways, of course, on Twitter, using the hashtag CornyDriveThru, or via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. And let's get going with our first one here. It was sent in by Moon Thunder to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com.
Well, why do you ask? Two dogs fucking. But go ahead.
Jim, I am a big fan and would like your opinion on something. I was listening to a Ted DiBiase shoot interview and was surprised to hear he had a low opinion of Bill Dundee as Mid-South Booker. DiBiase felt that Dundee hot-shotted the territory and made it difficult for anyone to follow. As you were brought in with Dundee and drew big money under his booking, what is your opinion on this?
Well, I was not there when Teddy was there because, and that's part of the problem, Teddy came in at that run. Obviously, he had been there before, a variety of times for Mid-South. But during the time that we were there and Bill had first started as booker, he was working. Where was he?
Georgia.
He was in Georgia, and he came in the later part of the year and then teamed up in 85. He and Doc were a team and worked with rock and roll, et cetera. After Midnight and I had left, Dundee was still booking. I don't honestly think that the territory was hot-shotted. I think the territory just got hot and continued to do big business. I think that inevitably, as hot as it was in 84, not only with the Midnight and rock and roll, but just with the rock and roll in general, with Hacksaw Duggan, except for New Orleans, they successfully transitioned away from JYD being the top guy when he left, and Magnum was over. It's hard to follow a run like that. And I don't think that even though Ted and Doc were a great team, they didn't have the magic with the rock and roll that the Midnight had, because obviously, part of this is if it was fucking real, even though everybody was a good worker involved and made exciting matches, if it was fucking real, Doc would have beat Ricky and Robert up pretty quick by himself. So it was, and also that's when, I guess toward the end of 85, first part of 86, the business in the territory in general and the economy around the area started going down. So I wouldn't call 84 hot-shotted. It was good angles and a lot of interesting shit going on, but it was big business, and it kept up for a long time. So I think it was just that Ted was probably disappointed because it was down by the time he got there.
Well, the other thing, too, is remember when Jarrett and Lawler were brought in by Watts to look at his talent, they said, where are the blowjobs? Where are the young ladies? we're the guys that will attract the young ladies. And that's when all of a sudden, it wasn't just that it was an influx of talent. It was new types of talent. You never saw smaller guys get over in Mid-South. It was a big guy territory. So Watts went with a different formula. And then towards the end of Dundee's booking reign, he went back to the old formula. Bob Sweethand's all of a sudden in there. Bowie Express are all of a sudden in there. Yeah. Like all of a sudden, big guys. Lord Humongous is in there. Al Perez and Wendell Cooley replaced the Rock and Roll Express as the top tag team. Everyone was bigger again. And I think that,
actually, Wendell Cooley is a guy that I always thought should have gotten over stronger than he got. Or let me try this again. Except, unless he just wanted to stay home, he had the talent to be a bigger star in a variety of places, I thought. But he was always just basically down there in that Florida Panhandle area. But anyway.
Seems like you could say that about so many guys who work for Southeastern. They could have been much bigger stars if they ever just wanted to leave Southeastern. Yeah.
But there you have it. Anyway, but no, I don't think it was hot-shotted. I think it was just time for it to go down. That's the thing. No disrespect to any of the talent that follows up a record year with just a really good year. It's not that they're lesser talent. It's just that you can't keep selling out and going on forever. That's what, fucking Shitstain one time. One of his famous quotes was when faced with the question of, what are you going to happen? Or what are you going to happen? What's going to happen? What are you going to do when business goes down? And he said, well, if we're smart, it'll never go down. Like anything ever just goes up and up and up until finally, what is it? Just, we've reached the stairway to heaven. Were you there when they built the stairway to heaven? No, it's always going to go up and down, and you can't do record business forever. And it was just time for it to go down because it couldn't get any bigger. We didn't just sell out every building in the territory except the Superdome, which we set second best gate and I think the third best too, that year. But we sold out every other building in the territory and several of them a number of times. You can't keep doing that forever. It was just time. And also the talent especially toward 86, that Bill Watts going back to the Giants did play a part also.
On a show we recently watched on the Mid-South Wrestling Television Review podcast, Watts in 82 made a comment about, hey, you may be seeing this Georgia wrestling. Guys go there if they can't make it here. That's why you may be seeing guys who used to be here, there. So that's 82. By the time you were there in 84, even though you lived in one place and you were just traveling in and out of every place nonstop, do you know what the cable penetration was like in that territory?
Oh, in Louisiana? Well,
and Oklahoma.
I do not in Oklahoma because I know in Louisiana they had local cable systems that obviously they carried TBS. If you just got regular basic cable in those days in Louisiana, I think you got TBS. I'm not entirely sure. I think you got TBS. But we didn't have time to watch it. But here's the fucking thing. I know we did in Dallas when we moved to Dallas, but in Louisiana, cable started, to me, not only helping but becoming a problem because since Watts had broadcast television in every market in Louisiana that had broadcast television stations, Monroe, Shreveport, Alexandria, Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, Lafayette, New Orleans. I did that off the top of my head. There may be another one. Monroe was only 75 miles up the road from Alexandria. On our local Alexandria cable, we not only got the Alexandria stations, but we got the Monroe stations too. So, and when some of those markets got two Mid-South shows, the studio show or Shreveport show from the Boys Club, and then the videotape show, Power Pro Wrestling, you could watch those shows 2 or 3 different times if you lived in Alex or Monroe or even Baton Rouge got the Lafayette stations, I think. There was so much Mid-South wrestling on television that the only problem was that the overlapping local promos gave the only indication you would ever get on Mid-South wrestling television that something was not completely legitimate when it would be the same lineup or the guys would say some of the same things. But he feels the same way. It was that type of thing. But that was a little twinkling. But you got a ton of fucking wrestling on television wherever you lived there.
So in 85, how many of those towns do you think had WWF television all of a sudden with the Junkyard Dog?
Oh, God, a lot of them. Probably everywhere. Probably on weaker stations for the most part. And it probably still didn't do the ratings. Because that's why that the WWF barely ran live events in that territory, because they couldn't sell tickets against Mid-South Wrestling. The people just didn't buy it, and they didn't. It was showbiz, and Watts would come out and say, "Yeah, that phony entertainment wrestling that you see, and where the guys aren't tough enough to hang like they are here," and a lot of the fans felt that way. So that's Mid-South, the Carolinas, and Tennessee is the three places that it was hardest and took the longest for WWF to really do numbers in.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Jeff Merriman in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. Just curious, what's your opinion about the AEW Double or Nothing being sold out in minutes? Mainly by these fucking scalper sites like StubHub. Either there should be a limit or have these sites shut down. They are ripping off the real fans. If it weren't for those assholes, would tickets have sold out that quickly?
Well, apparently, yes. I mean, didn't they get like 40,000 requests or something? I mean, I don't know all the mathematics, but how many tickets do they estimate that these scalpers bought?
Somewhere in the range of 750,000.
What? No.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, no, I mean, it's just the thing, this thing has legs. And remember, we said that, the first one became an event and became a happening and a thing, and Hold My Beer and etc. So now they've juiced it up with a new wrestling company being formed, and they have obviously a devoted base of fans, and they certainly can get 15 or 20,000 of them a time or two a year to do something like this, and make that investment of their finances and lives to go and be a part of it. And it was amazing. Nobody has done this before. These conditions have never existed in the business before. But once again, not to shit on it, but long term, when there is how is this television going to work when they have television? If it's a weekly show, are they going to be live every week? In that case, then they need to scale the buildings down, I would think, or sooner or later, this will be a bit harder to do if you're trying to do it once a week, or are they going to tape in clumps? But the concept of doing these big shows where they try to one-up themselves and reveal the next chapter is obviously still got some legs to it. It just, you can't, I mean, apropos, I didn't know this question was coming, but I just said after Louisiana did a record business year and sold out its top buildings multiple times, things eventually have to go down. Well, in this case, it does as well, and settle into what their business is going to be. And it remains to be seen how they want that to be.
The first one was All In. The next one's Double or Nothing. Do you think the next one's going to be Third Time's a Charm? All right. Well, our next question here, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from John Fell in Baltimore.
Uh-oh. We have not done this. We haven't done this in a long time. I don't know what we've had him black and blue, bleeding, laying on the floor, accused him of being clumsy and klutzy, made all the bad puns that we can make. You know what? Fuck the Fell. It's time to start fucking with the John. What is he? A goddamn hooker's customer? Or he's a toilet?
Fuck the Fell.
Yeah, fuck the Fell. Is he Norman Fell's fucking illegitimate nephew? No, we need to we need to really criticize more of the John part. Oh, Johnny Fell.
So that's a tease. You're not going to actually criticize the John part anymore.
Well, I just did. I said he sounded like a toilet. He sounded like whatever. What do you want me to say to the man?
Well, here's what
he's
he wants
fucking
to.
Clumsy too.
Here's what he wants to say to you. Hello, Jim. Thank you for the warmth and compassion that you always show me whenever I send in a question. No, he didn't write that. Hello, Jim. I was wondering what the payouts were for battle royals. I'm thinking the winner didn't win the money advertised, which could be $20,000 plus at times. How much do you think, let's say, Bruno made in Los Angeles in 1972 for their major battle royal?
Well, now that's different than, the prices advertised. Let's start out by saying for the uninitiated, battle royals started as far back as the 30s and 40s, when they were in a lot of cases looking for something to attract during the Depression or the war or whatever. And sometimes it was a 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 man battle royal because cards were smaller and matches were longer back in those days, or a wrestle royal. And it had different rules at first. First it was when a guy got beat, he was eliminated. Then they came up with the over the top rope thing. And of course, as time went on, having a top itself, the battle royals got big, but this took place over 30 years. It got more guys in them, and the prize was bigger. And then it started just getting inflated. And then, I remember one time in Memphis, they actually had Eddie Marlin build a special ring. It was all made out of wood because they're only going to use it twice. And it was a 30 by 30 square foot fucking ring built out of wood with real ropes. It was just goddamn abysmal to have matches in, but they had a 50-man battle royal.
Wow. Just
as an attraction to see what the fuck. But then they came up with the 2-ring battle royals that were all the rage in like 72, 73, 74. They did them in the AWA, did them in Tennessee, did them everywhere where they had the 2 rings side by side. And sometimes everybody would start in ring 1 and be thrown into ring 2. And then if you were thrown over to the floor, you were eliminated. In the AWA, they had 2 battle royals side by side. And the last 2 guys, or the last guy in each ring, then fought for the money. So there were variations. And of course, obviously, Pat Patterson later on, because of the success of the San Francisco Battle Royal, came up with the Royal Rumble. By the time that the San Francisco and Los Angeles Battle Royals came around and were still really over in the 70s, the Battle Royals in a lot of places, especially the Tennessee territory for one, had been prostituted to fucking death. Because that's how I got to my first show. I got my mom to promise me that if they had one of those big battle royals, she'd take me. Well, I've been watching TV. I knew they had one like every 3 months, right? So it came up like weeks later. But anyway, but in San Francisco and Los Angeles, they made a big deal out of it. And they brought in outside talent, and Bruno to Los Angeles or the San Francisco, Ray Stevens would always go back and guest in the San Francisco Battle Royal. And they promoted them as big deals. And they drew. It was a big show of the year. And it's another reason we talked about Dundee's booking and whether it was hot shotted or not in Watts' territory. Dundee brought to Louisiana that year the old gimmick that was used on spot shows in Tennessee, the blindfold battle royal, where everybody's got a hood over their head. There's 12 guys in the ring, can't see, and the last man's the winner. Well, fuck, it was a throwaway spot show match in Tennessee because they'd done it so much. But Watts put it in his mind and came out with, this is the main event in every one of my big arenas. On that card that night, we've got 20 guys, 250 pounds and up, completely blind, fighting for $20,000. They'll have to be thrown over the top rope, basically promising bones were going to be broken and people were going to be killed. And it drew once because they'd never seen anything like that, right? But how were you paid? That's a different story. The prize money got bigger. And I always liked the old $1 a pound thing. Like you had to pay an entrance fee. Sometimes the entrance fee would just be, we've got 20 guys, they've each put up $500 and the promoter's going to match it. So the winner gets $20,000. Well, that's kind of halfway believable in the AWA in the 70s because they could see that there was in arenas with 6, 8, 10,000 people in them, right? Okay. But when you had, a small show, there's 1,000 people there and they're promoting, the winner gets $20,000. I don't think so. Or $1 a pound, where if a guy weighs 236 pounds, he puts that much money up to get in it. And they always put Haystacks Calhoun at 600 pounds or Andre or whatever in there. And the prize money was however many 1,000 pounds was in the ring. The actual way you got paid Most of the time, you got paid dick all of nothing. The reason for that being is everybody in a battle royal, unless it was a big show and a big deal, had already worked on the card underneath. It was an old promoter's trick. And we're going to have a big battle royal because you had a bunch of guys that go out again. They were already there. And most of the time, they really get paid twice. You got paid for your fucking match. The top guys got paid enough money. They didn't give a fuck and they could figure out what they wanted to do in the battle royal anyway. And the opening match guys couldn't bitch because they just fucking fire them. So yes, in a lot of cases, guys didn't get paid shit. Now, for Bruno, because the idea on a show that was going to draw big based around a battle royal, and he's a huge star from New York and coming out there, he probably got paid, I would think, very close to what he would have got paid for a show in the Philadelphia Spectrum or the Boston Garden, maybe not Madison Square Garden. But, he was a guy that you would pay at that time a couple or $3 or $4 grand to. For an appearance like that, would you not? I mean, with he knew what the guys were getting in St. Louis for the NWA title. Is he going to fly across the country for, subpar pay?
And the biggest show of the year? Yeah,
no. So let's say he got $3 grand just to really punish Bruno and say he worked cheap for his level at the time and for something like that. What would $3 grand be from 1972? Today, 12, 13, 14, I don't have my calculator, but something like that. It depends. If you were only advertised in the bat, Andre was going to get paid the same fucking thing a lot, whether he had a handicap match or a single match or whether they put him in the battle royal because he was an attraction. But and even if Andre didn't win it, if the guy that won the battle royal ended up being a guy in the territory that was already figured in and not Andre the Giant, chances are Andre the Giant made more money for being in the battle royal than the guy that won it. But still.
$3 grand in 71 is approximately a little bit over $18,000 now.
Well, there you go. And, but that when you think about it, the Olympic Auditorium seated what, 11,000 some?
I think so.
Okay. Even in 1972 for the battle royal, tickets would have been probably $5 and $6, something like that, $7 in Los Angeles
at the most.
So, well, say an average ticket of $5. There's almost 60 grand. So if you gave Bruno the same percentage that he got for working WWF events, 5%, maybe that was a little bit before his percentage deal, but thereabouts, that's what you would end up with. And Bruno Sammartino was a huge attraction for them to have at that time. He made no West Coast dates. He'd been a champion in New York and on the cover of all the magazines for forever and ever. So it was even better than bringing Andre in. They'd probably see, well, at that time they hadn't seen Andre. Andre wasn't here yet, but they would see Andre a couple times a year in Los Angeles. They wouldn't see a guy like Bruno hardly ever.
Other than Bruno, the Sheik, and the NWA champion, how many other guys had mandatory percentages that they demanded?
In territories, some that I'm sure we're not even aware of, and they would get that either if they had a piece of the territory, that would be their fee for wrestling, or if they didn't have a piece of the territory, just because they were so over, they would make deals with the booker or the promoter. But on a level like that, very few, and probably some. Who was big in Montreal at that point in time? A lot of those guys, even if a lot of those guys took over the office up there. The Vachons and the Rougeaux, they've all owned wrestling up there. But to get a percentage in those days, you had to be an NWA champion or a big touring attraction, a la you just said, the Sheik, Andre, etc., or you had to be really, really over in a particular territory and integral to business. And then you could, and Lawler wasn't long after that. He was so over in Memphis. He got 10% of the house in Memphis on a regular basis long before he was a partner in the actual company.
Our next question, Jim, from Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru is from Sober Wrestling. I've been watching old NWA and I find David Crockett to be so bad that he is actually entertaining. I saw the clip of Nikita Koloff giving him the sickle, and Nikita really drilled him. How did the wrestlers and Tony feel about David and his commentary?
You know, David was not a person that you wanted to dislike or that a lot of the guys disliked. They could separate his commentary from the person. He didn't mean to be rotten. He was not a good announcer. And bless him. I hope he doesn't ever hear this. But goddamn, yeah, no, it wasn't. He wasn't. When Nikita. Of course, now when Nikita clotheslined him, he wanted Nikita to bring it because he was, he wanted to be one of the boys. He was not going to fucking make this look shitty just to protect himself, and he took it and went down quickly. But a lot of the boys were like, look at David, oh shit. But no, David was okay. He was not a natural announcer, but he was involved in the business for so long. And he started as a wrestler. Well, you know this, but he wanted to wrestle, and old man Crockett Sr. did not want them to take it any easier on him because of who he was or treat him any differently. So I've got one of the Mid-Atlantic discs is David Finley. That was his wrestling name. David Finley Crockett was his full name, against Swede Hansen. But nobody took it easy on him, and he tried his best, but they found out that probably in the ring was not for him, and they transitioned him to the microphone, which also was not for him, but nobody was going to get killed as a result.
He was so bad in the ring that they said, let's put him on commentary. He has to be better at this than he is at that.
But yeah, but he's got him by the honker. That was the world title match where Garvin and Flair. Garvin did the fucking spot where he grabbed Flair by the fucking nose and was pulling him up. And Flair's screaming, he's got him by the honker, Tony.
Whip him like a dog. Like he says that so believable. Like you believe that this is the guy who's whipped his dog.
Was it part of he was so overly babyface? He was so overly, it wasn't like trying to be a neutral announcer. He could not allow the slightest bit of heat, a smidge of heat to get on him on his commentary. He hated the fucking heels and took up for the baby faces and just too far.
And you got to love his commentary for a television show. I've heard so many different people do commentary and the ways of analyzing the wrestling. He would just say, again, you're watching at home. Tony, look at him. Look at him.
Look at him.
Look at him. That's what you're going to say over and over. Look at him. Look at Matt.
Look at what he's doing now.
All right. Well, let's get another question here, Jim. This one was sent in the CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from, it's a goofy name here, Honorable Fuckknuckle, I believe is what it says here, from Wales, the UK. Back in the very early 90s on Monday Night Raw, you managed Yokozuna in a sumo match against, I believe, Earthquake.
Oh,
the ropes were removed from the ring.
Yeah, they thoughtfully were.
What was your thoughts? See, this is worded so poorly.
Oh, so you're trying to explain your piss poor pronunciation.
I'm going to correct him. What were your thoughts standing at ringside watching 1,000 pounds of flesh smashed together? Also, what or who was responsible for booking a sumo match in an American pro wrestling promotion?
My thoughts was, how can I fucking get out of here? And I hope they're not watching in fucking Knoxville. I understand what they were trying to do, but see, I can see how this was sold to Vince McMahon. This was before I was on the creative team and before I was part of the process. And so I'm managing Yoko, as I said, everybody knows I was in Smoky Mountain full time and going to TVs and pay-per-views and managing Yoko at that point. And John Tenta, Earthquake, was a great guy and had a hell of an athlete and had been a legitimate sumo star in Japan. He had lived in Japan for years and had done sumo and before he became a pro. And Yoko, of course, was supposed to be, his gimmick was that he was a sumo. That's what Yokozuna means as grand champion in the sumo world. But obviously he was Samoan and he'd never done sumo wrestling in his life, but he played one on television. So knowing what I know now, I can see how, I don't know if it was Bruce. I don't know if it was Pat Patterson. I would think at that point it was one of those two. So what about we have these guys in a sumo match and we take the ropes down and there's this 600-pound guy and this 500-pound guy and they're butting against each other. And I can see Vince in his mind seeing, a Godzilla movie, right? And the people are going to be fucking screaming and the arena's on fire. And you could work in the way his mind works. You could work excitement up for something like that, right? So I can see how it was pitched and how it was approved. I also can see how that nobody involved bothered to think about what it was actually really going to fucking look like. Because it was fucking brutal. It hurt the fans' feelings. I was embarrassed for everybody involved. Because it was just two guys fucking running at each other. I mean, there's a reason why the sumo matches a lot of times only go seconds. Because you couldn't really work anything except tugging around and they worked sumo a little bit. And Yoko had that, wonderful stagger that he had when he was so big, but he was so athletic. He could stagger before he took his bump. But think about this. It's going to be a fucking letdown from the beginning because whoever takes the bump to the floor, it's not going to be what the people think it's going to be in their mind. They're going to imagine a splat with body, fluids going everywhere, and it's going to be a fucking popcorn fart because neither of those guys could. I mean, Yoko, I remember because they did a few of them. There was a couple of them, not all televised, but on that Yoko took the bump and rolled off. But neither one of those guys, 500 pounds, could take a bump off the side of the ring with no ropes and just go to the floor. That was not going to fucking happen, and you couldn't do a lot of different things leading up to that besides push, pull, and fucking tug and a little shoulder blocking. And they went on for fucking ever before it finally came to it. So you couldn't execute what they sold Vince. And I don't know why they didn't figure that out beforehand, but I did as soon as I saw it. It was fucking brutal.
What is it like being at ringside when you recognize something really, really awful is happening and you're stuck at ringside?
Do you know that happened to me more times in the WWF than than all other times in my career combined? And that's another thing that I felt awkward in a lot of those instances because think about this. I had come from 7 straight years of managing the Midnight Express, where traditionally we were the best match on the show or it was Flair and we were second. And then I'm in Knoxville where I'm managing Tom Pritchard to Stan Lane and then Tom and Jimmy Del Rey and the Bodies with the rock and roll and they're tearing the fucking house down, having these great matches. And even if I'd managed other people, I had worked with Dick Murdoch or Dr. Death. I was not at that time used to being around matches that were just fucking not come. And once again, there was some great Yokozuna and Undertaker was incredible. The people were on their feet and they were into them and there was action. But Yokozuna and Earthquake, or some of those battles of the behemoths with Yoko and Vader, or my God, the infamous Mantor rib, or just some of those slower paced WWF, especially dark matches at TV tapings where it'd just be brutal. And you were there, it's already midnight, right? I felt awkward in a lot of those. And there was that match with, my God, Davey Boy Smith and Bret Hart had one of the better WWF championship matches I've ever seen in my fucking life. And when Davey challenged Bret, but it was like 2 or 3 months removed from whenever Diesel got it and had that match with Davey Boy and Diesel was the absolute worst world championship match I've not only ever been involved in, but ever seen live in person. Ever to the point where I had gone back. I don't know. Davey wasn't having any of Nash, and I don't guess Nash was having any of Kevin. It was just a snoozer. Davey was working Nash's leg, and he rolled out on the floor. Nash did, and I dropped a fucking elbow on his leg just to keep it going and got the pop of the match. Just because they were doing nothing and it just didn't work. And afterwards I went to Vince. I said, Vince, I just want to apologize to you for my part in that. And he looked at me like, I don't think anybody had ever done that before in something that wasn't, ended up in somebody's arrest. He said, what do you mean? I said, that match was brutal. Because I went right there because I thought everybody would have thought that. He said, I thought it was fine. Fine, pal. Like, my God, what the fuck? It was fucking awful. So but yeah, that happened on a number of occasions there.
You brought up Dr. Death. You were there in 84 with him, and he was a big guy still. I mean, he was always a big guy, but he was just he hadn't even trained down to be like under 300 and look better body-wise yet. He was just massive. And he was really young still, relatively.
Yeah.
He was just out of school. What was it like the first time you ran into him and all of a sudden he was jacked up and lost all that baby fat?
Well, I wasn't away from him all that long. I started seeing it. Because when we first got there, he was still a baby face and still wearing all the collegiate gear and the headgear. And he was Dr. Death Steve Williams from OU. And then it was actually, I was involved in the way that they turned him heel, remember? Because he was referee between Hacksaw Duggan and Hercules Hernandez in New Orleans. I was trying to get even with Duggan for causing my head to get shaved. So Duggan's best friend in the world, Dr. Death, was a referee with Duggan's fucking hair on the line, blah, blah, blah. How the fuck did that thing go now that I'm trying to say it?
Remember, they were teasing it for a little while.
No, wait, it was Doc was the referee in the match where I got my head shaved. That's what it was. Remember, because the point
turned and they got the heat back by getting you. Yeah.
They got the heat back by getting me because it was supposed to be Doug. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you can even edit that if you want or not. It just shows I'm not perfect. It's been 35 fucking years. Give me a break. The goddamn deal was that it would be Hacksaw Duggan's hair versus my hair. Hacksaw Duggan versus my man Hercules Hernandez. And to make sure there was no funny business, Dr. Death Steve Williams, one of Duggan's close friends, was going to be the referee, but he's the one that dropped the elbow on the back of Duggan's head. I handed him a big wad of cash in the ring, and he turned heel and left, and we were going to shave Duggan's head, and then they trapped me and shaved mine. But the point is, then he started coming along, and then that's when he got more serious about he was always serious about training, but he dropped some weight and looked better physically, right? But also, his work was coming along because he was awful herky-jerky still when we got there. And the boys were glad they didn't have to work with him that much because we were in, tag team situations. But my God, you definitely knew if he'd grabbed a hold of you. By the end of the year, when we left and went to Dallas and he had switched, he was starting to have better matches. He was starting to get the flow of things more. He was soon to team up with Hercules, and they were going to have that run on top as a top heel team. He picked things up quick, and he looked better. But I'd seen him, still on TV from Dallas, and then it was within a year and a half, we were all getting together again for Crockett. But the thing with Doc was that he was able to still exude the fact that he was a fucking dangerous man in the ring, but he learned to work enough to where that he wasn't as dangerous as he used to be, really. So that was a good thing because my fucking God, but he was around, look, everybody was around. Bill Watts, Ernie Ladd, Bill Dundee as Booker, guys like DiBiase, guys like the Midnight Express, guys like the Rock and Roll. Duggan was a good worker in his mind psychologically. All those guys, he had great help and support.
This next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Mikey West in Raleigh's Village Idiots. I don't know if that's a band or what that is. But here's his questions. There's a few here, Jim. In the past, I've heard you say of a certain wrestler, Andrew Test Martin comes to mind. Nice guy, good worker, but he didn't have it. Can it be taught? Or is it purely a natural, either you're born with it or you're not type of thing? Can you think of anyone who didn't have it, but learned, for lack of a better term, to fake it?
Well, no, you don't really ever fake it because if you fake it, it's not really it and you don't get over it. It's only if you really have it that it's real it that, you can't teach it, but it can be coaxed out. And it's just a matter of, look at any young guy. You see all these pictures of young guys, not only in the territory days, but guys that are on top now that were in indies that just looked like fucking morons, right? When they were 18 years old or on an indie show or whatever the fuck. And a lot of times you see guys that, Chris Jericho, go back and watch Chris Jericho's promos in Smoky Mountain Wrestling and tell me that he was going to be such a great talker or singer. Go back and watch Lance Storms and tell me that anybody would ever give him a chance to do a promo again, for that matter. But I digress.
How about Hogan in Memphis?
Hulk Hogan on live Memphis television when he'd only been in business for a year. We've talked about guys that Tommy Rich. Tommy Rich was a klutz when he was 18 years old and just a rookie and couldn't really talk or say anything, but he learned to bring out a charisma that he had that people liked to watch him. And he never was a good, well-spoken, articulate promo, but he sounded like Tommy Rich should sound. And you felt like he meant it. All the guys that have it, not only they grow into it or they get comfortable enough that it comes out. It's just a personal magnetism where you like to or want to see them either wrestle or talk or just do something. And they seem like that, even if it's not textbook perfect in the way that you would teach someone how to have a match or do a promo, the people get into it because it's just the way they would really do it. You can tell that guy, Handsome Jimmy Valiant, when he was the biggest babyface in Memphis, if you transcribed his promos and put them on paper and read them, it made absolutely no sense. It wasn't even a stroke victim. It was just babble. But when you watched him and listened to him on TV saying it and you saw what was going on around him, he talked him into the building to the point they'd fly him back to Memphis, a couple of times a year just to have a special 6-man tag or something when he was in the Carolinas, and it would sell out just because he was there. And he'd send the promo and he'd talk him into the building. Wouldn't make a goddamn lick of sense. And his matches, if anybody else was doing them, were the drizzling fucking shits. But for Handsome Jimmy Valiant, that's what he would wrestle like, and that's what he would talk like, and that's what everybody wanted to fucking see. And he sold out.
Mikey's next question: what are your thoughts on Tully Blanchard's work? I always liked the way that Tully had two styles. If Tully didn't have a belt, he was always moving forward and very aggressive. If Tully held the title belt, he fought backwards, moving backwards, cautious, watching for openings. Even when I hated him for his churlish ways, I admired this logical approach to a match.
I wish I'd have read this letter 30 years ago so I could have called Tully churlish on a promo. Tully, his work was excellent, not only from a standpoint of the way he executed moves being safe and looking good, but also in terms of psychologically when to do things, making it a contest or a competition. Of course, his dad was a wrestler, not only a pro, but his father, Joe Blanchard, was a big-time amateur wrestler. And he'd grown up around a business all his life. He understood psychologically that he should be aggressive, if he's trying to get something. But he was always aggressive on heat. But if he was the champion, he would work more defensively and give the babyface more time to shine because he was going to pull the rug out from under him at the end. And he was just he wasn't flashy, which made Arn was a little flashier, and that made him a good team. But Arn was still the Anderson brothers ground-based style. But Tully also, he had to be hard-nosed and aggressive and like that because he knew he didn't have the size. He could carry off the look. He was the obnoxious, snotty, college jock that always excelled, had the nice suits, had that air about him. A lot of that was legitimate back in those days. And he knew he didn't have size, so he would stay on a guy or he'd break him down or he could make it legitimate that he could hang with a bigger guy. He was very credible and very real. And he talked the way that you would think a guy like that would fucking talk.
Mikey's last question: I've seen interviews with actors who went from working on big stages at live theaters to working on the small screen of TV. Specifically, they spoke of having to tone down their movements that were designed to convey body language to a 2,000-seat theater audience that would look goofy and cartoonish on a TV show. My question, you've spoken glowingly about how Dennis Condrey's body language could sell for the whole crowd in a 6,000-seat arena. Did wrestlers need to be told or reminded to tone it down when shooting studio wrestling shows?
It would not really. I think that was part of the appeal of studio wrestling, because there's that wild ass shit in the middle. No, I mean you knew your venue. So a lot of times, I mean, Tojo Yamamoto used to have a fucking trick. Bobby Eaton's favorite trick Tojo would do to get heat when he was a heel, where he would take a fucking toothpick out of the waistband of his tights, and he'd have a baby face in a wrist lock, and behind the referee's back, he'd be sticking the toothpick under the guy's fingernail. Now, that worked in the fucking high school gym or the National Guard Armory. Probably wouldn't have worked in Mid-South Coliseum. But in reverse, I think the reactions in a wrestling ring, I guess maybe now with television where it's the high-def cameras and they're just all over the place with close-ups, but I always liked the reactions in wrestling matches in the studio to be the same as in a coliseum, because it's wrestling. Of course, you don't have to and can't go all over the place in promos like you can if you're doing it live in a ring somewhere, because you don't have the room and you'll just walk away from the cameras. So I think a lot of times that's what would happen in studio shows is more often than not, the live interviews, when they broke down into bullshit, it'd be all over the place. You'd hardly be able to tell what was going on because they would get too big for the fucking set.
Our next question, Jim, was emailed into CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Ricky Roberts. Mr. Cornette, I'm from Paducah, Kentucky. Been a fan of yours since Midnight Express versus Original Midnight Express. I've been watching old episodes of the NWA WCW, and I see a returning JYD to the NWA. On his return, you confront the JYD about where he has been. He gives you an address, and you say, "That is your mama's place." JYD says yes, and he's now your new daddy.
Well, no, he's fucked that all up is what he's done there. What the deal was, that was when George Scott had briefly, it wasn't George Scott, it was Ole brought JYD back, wasn't it? In 90.
Yeah.
So the previous year, George Scott had brought back Sheik. JYD's coming back in, and he's been on the outs with Vince and obviously not there anymore. And I love Dog, but he was woefully overweight and he wasn't motivated in the ring, and he didn't look physically on promos or have the presence that he did in 1980, 81, 82, 83 when he captivated those people and looked like a fucking ebony god, right? He looked like a big old friendly, fucking sheepdog at that point. But we worked it out. He said, "Hey, say this, I say that." I said, "Okay." So the deal was, I said, "Well, Dog, we haven't seen you in the mainstream in a while," or whatever it was. "Where have you been?" He said, "I've been at 624 of Poplar Avenue in Louisville, Kentucky." I said, "Hey, that's my mama's house." And he says, yeah. And that promo was pretty much a precursor to how Dog got over on that whole fucking run. That's when he had the match with Flair, and Flair couldn't get it out of him anymore.
Did he also say that he was your new daddy?
Oh yeah. He said, "Yeah, and I'm your new daddy." Oh my God.
Everyone talks about Dog's weight. A lot of it too is when he lost his hair or when he started shaving his head, and he also started shaving his facial hair. That was a lot of his charisma, was the look.
And plus, I mean, when you look at him physically in 1981 versus 1990, it's a whole different human being. He looked indestructible. And plus, that's a classic example of an actor who would never again be nominated for Oscar performances, but did stellar work in one film because of great collaboration with a director. That was JYD and Bill Watts. Bill Watts knew exactly how to get him over. He knew exactly how to talk about him. He knew exactly who to put him in the ring with, and he knew exactly what the result needed to be. And and Dog carried every bit of it. And I mean, but Watts created that aura around him, and when that wasn't there, and Dog was not committed anymore, it just never worked again.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Phil Kundert.
What?
Phil Kundert.
Oh, well, under dirt, under sod, under whatever we want it to be.
I am from Owensboro, Kentucky, and enjoyed the OVW shows ran at the Neblett Center. My dad also told me about some of the wrestling shows being ran here in the 1970s at the Sports Center. Any memories or fun stories about Owensboro you would share from back then?
Well, not really fun, but Owensboro, I spent a month there one night. No, the town whore is a virgin. And, but anyway, you know, the motel was so small when I stuck the key in the door, it broke the window.
You gonna stop running down this Owensboro?
No, the Owensboro Sports Center, and actually, not only did they have periodic matches at the Sports Center in Owensboro in the 70s, but later on, I believe Memphis Territory had lost the TV in Evansville in the late 80s and went to Owensboro instead because the rent was cheaper on the building and they had a ability to promote there locally, I think through the radio or whatever. I'm not sure what all the details were. But yes, Owensboro's in northern Kentucky on the river in between Evansville and Louisville. So since Louisville and Evansville both ran every week, Owensboro would get spot shows. I was there one time. Now this is it's a gym. The Sports Center is a big gym that seats probably a couple thousand people. And there were about 500 people there that night. It was not a huge event, but the card was, I believe it was Jerry Lawler versus Kangaroo Al Costello, Bill Dundee versus Phil Hickerson, Norvell Austin versus Dennis Condrey, and then Al Costello, Phil Hickerson, and Dennis Condrey versus Norvell Austin, Jerry Lawler, and Bill Dundee. Paul Morton, Ricky's father, was the referee. And that was the entire card. And so they probably did, a $3,000 house, spent $300 on the Sports Center, paid Lawler $500, and everybody else got a couple. But that was 40 years ago, and so it was more of a spot show town. But then later on, they started running Owensboro regularly, as I said, in place of Evansville for a period of time, and that's pretty much Owensboro right there.
Our final question here this week, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Bobby Ballyard. My question is, who is Big Mama? And more importantly, why is Big Mama? Shouldn't the Boogie Woogie Man be doing better than that?
Well, now, come on now. Big Mama was indeed Big Mama. She was Jimmy's Big Mama, Felicia, the owner of Big Mama's Flowers on South Boulevard in Charlotte for, those many years. Because that's where Jimmy made so much money, he bought a flower shop for Big Mama to operate. Big Mama was really Big Mama. They didn't cast, for parts back in those days. If Jimmy was going to have his Big Mama, the leader of the street people or whatever, come in, it had to be Big Mama. And Felicia tried her darndest, and it just didn't work. She didn't turn out to be one of the great female performers in wrestling history. But I'd known her since, actually, I had first met her so long ago that I remember when Big Mama was really flat-chested Mama.
Now, how's that possible? I've heard you say that before, and obviously she got implants, and obviously they were gigantic, but you can't really go from being flat-chested to that big, can you?
Apparently you can. I mean, it's not like, an ironing board, but there was not a lot there to find unless you really went looking hard. Not to say I ever did, but you would have to study a picture or whatever for a second to get they weren't like right out there where you could get a good idea of everything right off the bat.
she mastered the walk and shake. Everything she did, she was shaking that top, no matter what she was doing.
Oh my God. And the thing, and when she'd shake the top, even when she'd stop walking, the top would still be shaking for a while. She was like in reverse, like old Charlie Harbin, this old timer down in Chattanooga. When I first got there in '83, he was shaped like a bowling pin. His ass was so fucking wide and broad, and he was old at that point. And here comes old Charlie Harbin, and he'd be walking more or less, throwing his right leg in front and then his left leg. He walked from side to side instead of straight on. And when he'd stop, not only would his arms still keep swinging for a second, but his ass would still keep vibrating from side to side, even when he was standing with both feet flat in the same position. Charlie Harbin.
Well, with that, what better time than now? The drive-thru is closed.
I beat you to it.
Okay.
Yeah. Charlie Harbin, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, but no, he was funny. He was an old timer. He'd wrestled more than one bear in his day. I wrecked him.
And he had been in the Georgia office for years.
Yes.
That's how he ended up in Chattanooga, actually, now that I think about it.
Well, there you go.
Well,
did you ever meet Charlie Harbin?
I never did.
And he had a strange way of talking to us. I remember like that, and slobber would come off in some cases.
I'm glad we could pay tribute to him here today.
if anybody knows where Charlie's living descendants are, old Charlie Harbin down in Chattanooga, we'd like to get a hold of him, and possibly anybody related to old referee Bob Holland as well. He was Bob Eaton's favorite referee, Bob Holland.
Bob Holland, I don't know Bob.
Nobody has ever. No, this is the only wrestling podcast in calendar year 2019 that will mention referee Bob Holland. Tell
me about him. I don't know anything about him.
I don't know. I don't remember him that well either, but he was Bobby Eaton's favorite referee.
Why?
He refereed for years for Nick Goulas because he was good.
All right. Well, with that. For real this time.
Here's another name nobody mentions these days.
Well, you could hear more of these nameless people from wrestling's history on the Jim Cornette Experience, which debuts on Thursday, wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. Remember, this week, Jim reviews Raw Part 2. I guess that means I may have to watch it as well. We'll see what happens. Also want to mention past and present episodes of The Experience and The Drive-Thru with exclusive Travis Heckel artwork go up regularly at the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. You can go to tinyurl.com/official Corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette, and you'll see a pop-up right there, official Jim Cornette channel. Subscribe, and each week's episode, after you hear it, you got to see the artwork. Travis has been knocking it out of the park each and every week, and stay tuned to that channel for more exciting content. We have a lot of things planned. Like I said, stay tuned. And there is a location for them to stay tuned to, Jim. They can go to tinyurl.com/official Corny YouTube. Of course, you could follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last, and you can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast, The Mothership. Available at 605pod.com or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcasts, classic wrestling talk, and wrestling humor. The 605 Superpodcast. Of course, we encourage you to visit Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com for t-shirts, burger towels, restraining orders, autograph photos, DVDs, books, and so much more. jimcornette.com. Are you still awake? Are you still there? There he is. Okay, he is awake.
You've done a great job.
I barreled through it, and we'll barrel through it again next week. For Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!